Drinking is never taught in our schools, and most written history doesn't even mention it. But a new book argues that a glass of beer, a bottle of rum, a keg of cider, and a flask of whiskey quietly influenced many decisions that shape American history from the 17th century to the present. Drinking in America, Our Secret History, is written by best-selling author and historian Susan Cheever. Susan, good morning.
Good morning.
So is there a reference point that you have for when we start being influenced by alcohol?
Well, I think historically, the original reference point is the Pilgrims, which is the original reference point of this country. The Pilgrims landed on Cape Cod because they were running out of beer. They were supposed to go to Virginia. Their charter was for Virginia. They knew it was illegal to land on Cape Cod, but they were running out of beer, as William Bradford wrote, and so they had to land, so they landed on Cape Cod, which was the worst possible place to land. I mean, they found a tiny little harbor between the two greatest harbors in the world, New York and Boston, Plymouth. They chose Plymouth. So not only were they running out of beer, but their ration was a gallon of beer a day for every man, woman, and child. So that may have affected them as well. So it begins at the beginning.
So that's something to think about on this Thanksgiving weekend with our pilgrims.
Yes.
And you say by the time that the Revolution came around, actually, that colonists were drinking about twice as much as the average person drinks today?
Well, it started with the Pilgrims, and it just built and built and built until about 1830, when we were one of the drunkest countries in the world. Children had a drink before they went to school, grain, alcohol, and juice. Farmers had a bottle at the end of every row. Factory workers broke 3 or 4 times a day for a drink. We were extremely drunk in the 1830s.
What I thought was interesting about the book is you give us some sort of historical reference in that water was unclean. So it was kind of default.
Yes, with the Pilgrims, to be fair, you weren't supposed to drink water in those days because there was no sewage system, so water was unclean. So that's why they had to drink so much beer. It also had the obvious effect on them. But I guess what I want my readers to see is that liquor has had a huge effect on how American history has unfolded. Starting with the Pilgrims, right through the American Revolution. Paul Revere stopped for a couple drinks on his ride. You know, when he got to Lexington, the militia had, the militia waited for the British in Lexington for 3 or 4 hours in a tavern. So right through the Civil War, right through Nixon, right through the Kennedy assassination, drinking has had a huge effect on us. Not always bad. I do not, many people believe that when Lincoln fired his sober general and hired Ulysses S. Grant, who had already had to resign from the army for drinking, who had already been in a lot of trouble for drinking, that's when we began to win the Civil War. So it isn't all bad at all. I don't think the American Revolution would have happened unless there had been drinking. The Sons of Liberty met at the Green Dragon Tavern. Is that bad? And the Boston Tea Party, they went out to those ships to secure the tea so that the British would have to take it back to England, but they were a little drunk, so throwing it overboard seemed like a better idea,
By the time you get to the 1920s, though, we get to Prohibition. We go from this country in 1820 that was one of the drunkest in the world, and all of a sudden we want to get rid of it entirely.
Well, it's so interesting because other countries drink more than we do and other countries drink less, but no other country has the passionate ambivalence that we have about alcohol. We love drinking and we hate drunkenness. And that starts with the Puritans. Drinking is the good creature of God and drunkenness is from the devil, as if there's no connection.
Most people have heard of sort of these beer summits. We're aware that liquor plays some role, but when you look at the White House, when you were doing all your research, how big of a role has it played in what we've seen in the past century?
It's played a tremendous role in the White House and everywhere. I mean, Warren G. Harding was a Prohibition president who could not give up his parties. And there's a hilarious, very sad scene where the head of the American Saloon League goes to him and says, it's Prohibition. We can't have a president who's giving these famous parties and being drunk all the time. And Warren G. Harding says, but I drink for medical reasons, right? And this guy says, no. And Warren G. Harding stops drinking, and 6 weeks later, he's dead of somewhat mysterious causes. So that's the saddest White House story. But of course, we've had drunks in the White House, and we've had sober people in the White House.
And you say Richard Nixon was usually drunk after like one drink.
Well, he was one of those weird drunks. Ulysses S. Grant was like that too, where often 2 drinks would he'd be passed out.
Well, the book is absolutely fascinating. Again, it's called Drinking in America. Susan Cheever, thank you.
Thank you.